Images in Next.js. There's surprisingly quite a bit to know when it comes to using images in Next.js and using the next image component. So today's video is going to cover that, and we're first going to just do an overview of some good things that are to know about using images in Next.js, and then we're going to get into local images, and then we're going to cover remote images, so images that are local to your computer and images that you're storing on something that is remote, so a remote server like maybe CloudFront or some other hosting platform for your images. And then we're going to discuss image priority as well as sizing and styling your images within Next.js. So in this project here, I've just created a Next.js app to have my different notes here. So you can go to my repo here, so code Ryan Solomon /next images on GitHub. I will also try to make sure that this is linked in the description, and you can kind of just clone this, run npm run dev, and once you do so, you should see this project start up on localhost 3000 here. All right, but as an overview here, images in web development can be a little bit tricky, in which there's quite a few different things to consider on whether you want to use like the image element, whether you just want to set the background of a div to be an image, and different sizing. Also making sure that you're serving the correct image size. So you have different sizing in terms of CSS, like how you want your image to be presented on your page. But then you also have the size of the image that you serve to the browser and then kind of style it from there. So you have different things regarding that. So they can be a little bit tricky. But Next.js does make it a bit easier with various optimizations. And it does this by allowing you to use the image component from next/image. So Next.js has a package called image, and you can import an image component from next/image, and it provides some of these optimizations. And this image component, it will extend the HTML IMG element, so the HTML image element. So it works similarly to that, but it does provide some optimizations there. And then you get automatic size optimization, where Next.js correctly serves the right image size for each device using WebP and AVIF image formats. So these two different formats here are kind of newer image formats that allow for a bit better sizing and some different optimizations when it comes to images. So Next.js will use these to provide the correct sizing to make sure that you're not running into issues of, on mobile serving an image that is way larger than you need to serve. And also Next.js, it helps kind of prevent layout shift. So layout shift might be what someone considers to be like page jankiness. I'm not sure if that is an official term or if that's just something that I use, but it's like when you go to a website, and when the page is initially loading, you see the page kind of hopping around quite a bit. So you see different elements kind of changing in size and just kind of moving around. This is considered to be layout shift. And as a core web vital, so Google has these core web vitals in which it helps Google rank like the quality of a web page, and it can help you with search engine optimization and different things like that. And Google has found them to be important when it comes to someone visiting your site and having a good experience. And cumulative layout shift is one of those core web vitals. So if you have a lot of layout shift, which can result from your images, it can result in poor kind of search rankings and stuff like that, which is definitely not what you want. And it also just looks terrible, and you don't want someone arriving on your website and seeing this. So this image component, it helps prevent this layout shift that can occur with images. And then also images are lazily loaded. So Next.js, when using the image component, it will only load these images when they enter the user's viewport. So when an image starts to become visible within the web page that the user is looking at within their viewport, that's when Next.js loads them. They don't automatically load all images up front, which has the benefit of images. They tend to be in in larger size. So images can take longer to load, but if you only load them lazily when you need to load them, it can help with your initial page loads and improve other core web vitals like time to first interactive, time to first paint, and make your page feel much snappier because you're waiting to load these images when they're actually in the user's viewport. And then you also have on-demand image resizing and responsiveness, which we will cover a bit more once we get to size/style here. So that is an overview of images in Next.js, but now let's get to some examples here and some different things to consider. So first up, we have local images, and to use a local images, you use an import statement to import the image similar to how you'd import a component in Next.js. So let's go to VS Code here, my code editor, and I'm going to go to my local folder and then my page.jsx within my local folder. Here within this component, you can see that I import this image right here. So I import Daytona. I'm pretty into watches, so in a lot of my projects, I use kind of watches, and a Rolex Daytona is a certain type of watch, which I'll show you in just a second, but I'm importing this image from my public folder here, and I'm importing my two-tone Daytona. So I'm importing this image from my public folder. So I'm kind of importing this just like I would any other component. So I'm importing Daytona from the file path of wherever my image is. So I'm just importing this local image, and this is a local image because it's just an image sitting within my public folder. You might also have this as an assets folder, but the important thing to remember is that I have downloaded this image and added it to my project. So it is a local to my own machine here. It's not on some remote hosting platform. So with this, I just import this image just like any other image, and then Next.js will automatically determine the width and height for your image based on your imported file, preventing layout shift. And I also mentioned that you do need to import the image component from next/image. So you can see right here, I use this image component and I import the image from next/image. So Next.js has an image kind of package in which you can import the image component from it. All right, so to use the image, you do a local import of your image pointing to whatever file you have your image here. And then you also import the image component from Next.js. And then to use this, all I need to do is on the src of my image component, I set it to equal my imported local image. So I imported Daytona from wherever my local image is sitting. And then as my src, I pass in Daytona. And then I set some alt text just like you would with a regular HTML image. I just have Daytona, but I could maybe make this more descriptive and be like Daytona watch. And then for my style here, I just set width is 100% and height is set to auto. So I'm not specifically setting a width or a height on this property. I'm just saying, okay, I want my width to be 100% and Next.js can take care of my height for me and just make sure that it's sized correctly here. So if I go back, you can see that I do indeed have my image, and this image, it was a larger image from the website I got. And usually for my projects, I use a site called Pexels, PEXELS.com, where you can use kind of free, copyright free images that you can just come here and download for free. But here you could see the Rolex Daytona image has rendered out here. And if I open my inspector here and I just kind of resize my page, you can see Next.js is automatically making this nice and responsive, and it keeps its aspect ratio, and it just does a good job out of the box with this image here. So this is already a very responsive image by just using the width of 100% and the height of auto here. All right, so that is really what you need to know regarding using local images. You just import your image, your actual image file, your .jpeg or .png or whatever it is, just like you would with any other component. Do an import, whatever the name is, from whatever the path is to that image, and then you import your image component from Next.js, and then as the SRC, you pass in your image that you just imported. And you can give it alt text, and you can set some different width, height, styles, and different things like that. But we'll get into that a little bit more in a second. But that is how you can use local images within your projects. Now for remote images, these are images that you are going to host on some other platform. So you might hold all of your assets or different images on something like, I believe there's like Cloudflare that's popular for this, or some image hosting platform. And then to use these remote images within Next.js, you make the SRC prop. So just like how we set it with our local images, we set the SRC to be the locally imported image. But here with remote images, you make the SRC prop the URL path pointing to your remote image. And when using remote images, you need to add a width and height prop manually to your image component. You need to do this because Next.js doesn't have access to remote files during build time. So since Next.js doesn't have access to these remote files, it can't automatically just set the width and height for you. You need to explicitly set your width and height. However, the Next.js docs mention that when using the width and height, it just sets the image aspect ratio and it doesn't set necessarily the specific size. So you can use the width and height to set your aspect ratio, so the ratio of your width to your height, but you could also use styles and like class names and different things like that, which we'll cover here in a second, to set more specific sizes of your image. And then in addition to this, you also need to update your next.config.js with your remote URL path to allow this import to happen. So let's look at an example of this. And as you can see, I have my Omega watch here as well. So if I open my remote folder and I go to my page.jsx, you can see here that I have my imported image here from next/image, and then I'm using it down below. And what I'm doing here is I'm setting my SRC to the path of where I'm hosting this image. So I'm just using a free image hosting service here in which I uploaded this image to this service, and this is the path that it gave me. So I'm telling Next.js that this is the path to where my remote image is, and then I set the alt text like I normally do, so Omega watch, and then I set my aspect ratio, so a width of 525 and a height of 400. Now, this won't work just like this out of the box. You also need to adjust your next.config.js. So within this, you're going to have a next config, and this is going to be an object. And initially, this is just going to be an empty object. So if you started a new project, all you would see within this folder is something like this: next config equals an empty object. But what you need to do is add an images property to this next config object, and then you need to set within that images property a property called remote patterns. And within that remote patterns property, you can point that to an array that is going to tell Next.js, hey, these are the remote patterns or the remote paths that I want you to allow within this project. So here you can see I set a protocol, or within my remote patterns, I pass in an object to my remote patterns array in which I set a protocol on that object to be HTTPS, and then I set my host name. So this is the host name of my URL path. So if I go back to this, you can see my host name here is i.ibb.co. And then you can see my port, I don't need to specify, but my path name, I do specify as this path name here. And that is the same path name that matches right here. So within, if you're going to use remote images, you need to set your SRC to be the URL pointing to your remote image that your hosting service will give you. And then you need to make sure to specify within your next.config.js, you need to specify that you match this pattern to allow this import to occur. So I have my protocol here of HTTPS, my host name here, and then it matches my path. And you can use different like regular expressions and stuff like that. So like you wouldn't necessarily need to match this exact specific path. You could use a star here or something. So it matches a bunch of different paths to allow for your different remote images. So that is kind of one of the trickier parts of remote images. But once you kind of make sure that this path is matching, we can go back here and you can just set the width and height because it's a remote image and you need to do that. And if we go back, we see that everything is working as expected here. So that is local and remote images. But now let's touch on priority here. So for priority, you can add a priority prop to the image component that will be the largest contentful paint. This allows Next.js to load this image first, improving your LCP core web vitals. So alongside those core web vitals that I mentioned earlier, there's also something called a largest contentful paint. So like how soon does your first like piece of content or your largest piece of content show, or your first meaningful piece of content show to the user? And often, if you have a large image, like a hero image, if that loads very quickly, that's going to improve your LCP, or largest contentful paint. So the LCP element is usually the largest image visible within the viewport of the page. And I'm going to show you a demo on a slower network so you can see this priority working in action. But here in this example here, let's say that I arrived at this web page and I have these two different images. I have my Rolex Daytona, and I also have this Rolex Deep Sea here. But as you can see, let's say this is my page, if I arrived on this page, I would say my largest contentful paint is going to be this larger Rolex Daytona here, and then more secondary is going to be this Rolex down here. So the way that I can tell Next.js to prioritize the loading of this larger image here is if I go back here and I go to my priority folder and open my page, I can set a priority prop here on my larger image. And that's exactly what I do here. On my Daytona image, I set a priority prop, which is just a Boolean saying this image should have priority on this page. And I don't set it on my second Rolex watch here. And if I go back here and I open my inspector and I go to my network tab and I set my throttling to slow 3G here, and I do a hard reload of my page with Command-Shift-R, this is going to take a second to start reloading. You see the Daytona starts coming in. The other image also started just a little bit later. And the Daytona is a little bit larger here. And we're going to see the Daytona finishes, and then this Deep Sea finishes after. So it's just prioritizing this larger image just a bit more. And I'm setting that with the priority prop within Next.js. Okay. So if you have a page in which you have multiple images on it, but one image is kind of your LCP image, it's your largest kind of contentful paint. Maybe you have a hero image at the center of your page and then an image in your sidebar. You can set priority for that hero image to make sure Next.js prioritizes that a little bit more, and that will help improve your kind of core web vital scores. And then finally, we have some different sizing and style things to keep in mind. So there are 3 ways to size a next image. Number 1 is automatically within a local import and not setting the width and height. So as I showed you earlier in my local images here, I didn't specifically set like a width here, nor did I set a height. I just imported my image and I just said, okay, I will set just 100% here, but then for the height, I'm going to set it to auto. And Next.js will automatically kind of resize this and allow for, and that's how this image is currently set down here as well, and make it responsive as you can see there. But also, you can explicitly add a width and height property. So within my remote images, you need to set the width and height property because Next.js doesn't initially know about your remote images. So you need to set the explicit width and height here for these images. And you can also implicitly use a fill prop on your image. And this will basically tell Next.js that you want it to fill your parent's element. And I'll show you an example of this in just a second. And then you can also style your next images similar to how you'd style a regular HTML image. However, it recommends using either class name or the style prop. So if you have different classes, so here I have classes in my page.module.css, and I import those styles here, and then I set on my main element a class name of styles.main, and that is going to use whatever styles I have within this that are main right here. So I'm using CSS modules and class names. You can do the very same thing to set those styles on your image components. So I could do something like class name is equal to styles.image or something of that nature. And then additionally, you can also use a style prop like I do here. So I set style is equal to an object here, and then I set my width, my height, then I can set different things like that to style my images. But Next.js recommends to not use styled.jsx. So you should use either the class name or the style prop and pass in an object. Now, when using fill, the parent element must have position relative set, and it also must be display block. So just a couple of things there to keep in mind when using the fill prop. And we can use the fill prop to make a full screen background for the image below. And we can also set object fit cover. So let me show you how fill works here. And I will show you this in action. So here for my Daytona image on this page, I can just set a fill property telling Next.js that I want this image to fill my entire parent container. And then I can also set within my style prop here, I can do object fit is cover, and that should get me pretty close. So that gets me to having this full-sized image, but you can see here that it covers up all of my text. So to fix this, I can just set a Z index, and I believe I can just do -1 here. And if I do that, you can see my text now appears on top. Of course, this looks a little bit nasty. I would also want to maybe do like an overlay here to darken this so you could still read the text, or change the color of my text, or do something there. But you can use the fill property to fill the entire parent container, and then object fit of cover just like you would with regular HTML images. So images within Next.js. Next.js gives you this image component to provide various optimizations, including serving the right size, preventing layout shift, lazily loading them, and having on-demand resizing and responsiveness. For local images, you can just import that image locally from wherever it's sitting within your project, just how you would import any other image, and then set the src prop to that image. And then Next.js can automatically determine the width and the height of that image. But with remote images, you set the src to be the path to whatever that your hosting platform is of where that image sits. But then you do need to set the width and height on that image, because Next.js won't know about the image during build time. And then you can also set a priority prop of your image to tell Next.js, hey, this image is most important, load this one first. And then you can also do different sizing and styles. So you can automatically allow your resizing to occur with your local imports by not setting width and height. You can explicitly style by setting the width and height property like you need to for remote imports. You can implicitly style things or size things using the fill property, like we did here for this image, to make it fill the parent container. And then for styling, you should use either a class name prop or a style prop. You should not use styled JSX. So hopefully that gives you a good idea on using images within Next.js. I know there's actually quite a bit here when it comes to images, but it's definitely a good thing to understand, as almost all applications use some sort of image. So thanks for tuning into this. I'll see you in that next one.